Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today or whenever it is you're watching us. And my guest this morning is Jennifer Iliana. And Jennifer's been a guest on the podcast in December. I have that link below. And then just 2 or 3 weeks ago, she was a guest combined with Kyle Cranston, and we talked about um, oracle readings or intuitive readings. And Jennifer is very talented, intuitive healer, and she does a variety of healing modalities. And I'll just read a little bit of her biography. And Jennifer, thanks for being here today. And so Jennifer Iliana is a spiritual coach, a registered nurse with 17 years of experience, and an intuitive healer that is certified in alchemy, crystal healing, elemental healing, soul shifting, soul coaching, oracle readings, manifestation guide, oracle and spiritual channel, living astrology practitioners, sound healing, angel numerology, and Reiki Level 2. Is there anything else you've added since? I think this is the description I read in December. So we'll have you talk about anything new you're doing beside those. And um, Jennifer guides individuals to navigate through spiritual awakenings and find meaning in their life. And experience when working with her, you'd experience the magic that happens when you shift the energy, the elements, listen to astrology and the crystals to shift your physical, mental, and spiritual. And I have her links below for her website, jenniferilianacoaching.com, and her social media links. And today, though, we're going to talk about generational healing. I know it's been important to you, Jennifer, and it's been very important to me. I think ancestral and generational are kind of very, very similar and overlap in many ways. And so Jennifer, what would you like to start? I guess I had a question. When did you first become aware of generational patterns and that you could shift them? And was it like in your own life, or was it in your work as a nurse, perhaps?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And thank you again for having me. So I would say for me, the awareness came about when I was in my 30s. I had experienced a lot of what was considered trauma, but at that time I just thought it was like life just happened. I never really had those conversations about what is trauma, what isn't trauma. I didn't really have a lot of exposure outside of my family, so I just assumed that the stuff that happened in my family was just normal, right? And so when I finally broke away and kind of developed my own person and was able to kind of create my own family and start my own journey that wasn't dependent on my family because there was a lot of codependency. So I couldn't see outside of that. I was opened up to this whole new world that no, this is not how things usually are. These are a lot of dysfunctional patterns. And a lot of the healing work began with myself. As you may be aware, a lot of people that have these patterns of like traumatic events that get passed down through the lineage eventually become very ill. At some point the body says enough. So actually my inner healing began through healing a real physical illness. So that's when I really became aware of that. And once I opened myself up to spirituality, that's when it exploded, because now I was able to not only work in the physical world, I had access to the spirit world where a lot of my ancestors are.
Hmm. Yeah, very nice. So, if you don't mind, what are some of the generational healing or generational patterns then specifically, if you'd like to share in your own life, or if you don't mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So for my family specifically, I was first generation born in the USA. My parents come from Puerto Rico, which even though it's considered a commonwealth of the United States, it is very different than this country. And growing up, I grew up essentially in two different worlds, but never felt like I belonged to any of them. So at home, we kept the Puerto Rican culture, the language, and then when I went to school, I was immersed in the American way of life. And as a child, I was very conflicted because I didn't understand how both worlds could be so different. And I didn't really have adults at home that could bridge it. And at school and with my peers, I didn't have the language around how to ask these questions. So there was like a lot of shame because it's like my family didn't look like the other families, and they didn't dress like other families, and I was very poor and I had a lot of hand me downs, so I didn't dress like the other kids. So there was just a lot going on, and I think for me a lot was just misunderstanding and not having the ability to ask. um, my parents did not speak the language, so that automatically made me their navigator. I became a parentified daughter at a very young age, trying to fill in a role that honestly I couldn't do. I was a child trying to be a parent. Meanwhile, I needed parents. And, you know, my father was traumatized as a child. He became an alcoholic, had patterns of abuse in his, you know, he was abusive and, you know, he had received abuse. But by the time I was born, he was like 58. So he was a very older parent. He kind of mellowed out. So I didn't experience a lot of the abusiveness from him, but I did experience a lot of the control, wanting to put me in a very gender specific role, and expectations of what a woman should or shouldn't do came from him. And then with my mother, there was a 25-year difference between them. So my mother had me in her late 30s. And she had a lot of trauma, and she was kind of like stuck in her trauma. So she was unable to be there for me emotionally and provide for my needs as a child. I felt a lot of times like I needed to kind of take care of her and make sure she was okay, because she was unpredictable with her emotions. So I never knew who I was going to get, what version of her. So I felt very responsible for keeping the emotional landscape of the house intact. And then, you know, I did have siblings, but they were much older than me and out of the house. And a lot of them, unfortunately, were substance abuse, and a lot of them were having mental health issues of their own. And for me, because I was the baby and they saw my father very different with me, a lot of them had a lot of resentment towards me and said that I was privileged because I didn't get the side of him that they got. So it wasn't very like warm and fuzzy from them. So a lot of the times I felt like my own family just did not like me because I didn't have to live in the conditions that they lived. And because I was born in the US, they assumed that I had more access and more privilege and I had more resources than they did. And they often would say that I was very stuck up, or like just had these judgments of me that as a little kid I didn't quite understand, like why would you think these things of me. And you know, so it was very confusing for me as a child, and I had to kind of fill in the gaps and create my own stories around what was happening. So that to me, as I grew up, I had a hard time understanding what was real and what was made up, because I had to kind of create something that would create a sense of security for me in an environment that wasn't secure.
Yeah. I think we all have those problems with those made up stories from our childhood. And
Yes.
It's it's so sad in a way, right? That those stories get created like that with because we don't have anything to understand, right? Or to compare it to.
Absolutely.
And one thing that's just really been a big change for me in the last few weeks is I had interviewed Brad Yates, who does tapping, a few weeks ago. And when I was reading his website to prepare for the podcast, there was a phrase he used that those patterns were just misguided love. And
Yeah.
it just really hit me so much, so that instead of thinking of it as hating me or me hating it, to realize that all of me has always loved me all the time. It's just another mind story to understand. And I think that's huge for
Yes,
people. I know it's huge for me, and for all of us as we grow up and begin our inner healing to to realize it's love, right? And alchemy.
absolutely.
But I talk about love, I think probably in generational things, um, well, I guess it's the same thing. We often see it as lack of love from our parents or grandparents or however it was passed down. And to begin to see that as, it was still love then, just to get a new perspective and put a different pair of glasses on, basically to
Absolutely.
see things as an adult, whatever age you start your healing journey. Like I started late in life, and it's huge. So,
It is
it,
huge.
yeah. So I was wondering then, as a nurse, did you notice generational patterns then in your patients that you worked, or
Yeah.
you probably only saw just one of them, but I'm sure they talked with you and you saw their history and things.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a lot of because I dealt with a lot of older patients in the critical care area where there was a lot of end of life. There was a lot of, and one of the common themes was and again, it's I didn't get into each of the family stories, but there's always some kind of the parent doing what the child wanted, because we dealt with a lot of like, do you want to be resuscitated, not resuscitated? A lot of patients just felt like they had to do what their children wanted. Meanwhile, their children were a lot of times you had the one child that was in charge, and there was always sibling issues, and the siblings would not get on the same page, and each sibling wanted the parent to stick around for their own reasons. So we dealt a lot with those kind of dysfunctions, and I remember just a lot of times witnessing arguments between like the parents and the children, and a lot had to do with what they didn't get or what the parent didn't do, or a lot of times I saw the parentification of the child coming, saying to the parent, you never prepared me for this, I had to always take care of you. So I think that, and this was going beyond different cultures. There was a similar flavor of that between the different cultures, but I noticed it a lot with um, parents that immigrated to this country and had first generation of children born. I saw it the most. And I don't know if it's because that's the story that felt more familiar to me, so my antennas went up quicker to those, but I did notice a lot of that because regardless of the situation, the moment that a child has something over the parent, meaning like for me, like speaking the language was huge. It already creates a inequity in power, right? The child essentially becomes more powerful than the parent, not because they
Mm,
chose to, not because they stepped up, but because they're able to do things that the parent can't. So it already creates that shift in power dynamics, whether there's consciousness or not.
right. Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. Um, I guess in my mind, I'm going back to other scenarios and seeing that same thing, not just, because of language but just in, say, technology. Right? I mean, it kind of gets flipped that way now, where even, 30, 20 years ago, I was asking my grade school age kids, here, fix my phone. And,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but it kind of flips that, in many ways. Yeah. And it causes, yeah, that confusion, or, I guess a lot of times it perhaps takes the respect, probably isn't the word, but your authority. Right.
Yeah.
The
Uh,
natural authority, um, that should apply to the parent because of their placeholder, you know, um, then
yeah.
in your life, then it gets flipped, and depending on the child, especially if it starts very young, that could be very confusing.
There's like a blurring of the lines. And I think also a lot of times, you'll hear people say, like, you weren't born with a handbook. So a lot of parents are trial and error, and each generation is trying to do better than the one that came before it. Now, their methods may be a
Yes.
little questionable, but I truly believe that every generation of parents is trying in some way or form to do better than the one that came before it. But we're not taking into account that generations are raising a generation that's not the same as them, and they're not taking into consideration what's the differences between them. So instead of trying to understand and learn the generation that they are parenting, they try to go towards ways of controlling, and they step into more trying to be authority figures and trying to use maybe like authoritative ways, or like, just things that are not working for that generation because that's all that they know. And I think that also the society that we live in keeps parents so busy that, the time that they would take to maybe try to sit down and understand and try to bridge the knowledge gap is consumed with everyday chores, like going to work and taking care of the household and getting the kids from here to there. So that time that they probably would invest in trying to understand the generation is just not there. And it kind of falls to the back burner as they're just trying to survive their daily task. So it kind of becomes like, well, this is just the way it is. I'm doing my best. But again, perception is everything, right? So how that child is perceiving your best is going to imprint on them for the rest of their life. And then eventually they grow up and have to either choose to deal with it or continue the same patterns.
Right. Well, and it complicates things because, like, you'd have your first child, and then you learn from that. So you feel more prepared for the second one, maybe. But then the second one is totally different than the first, and you have to start all over with every
Absolutely.
child. And,
Yes.
and so you end up basically um, kind of treating each child different as they come because it takes that. But then the children can look at that and think they're treated unfairly, right? Or one has an
Oh,
advantage or another.
absolutely.
And it's not the case. It's just how you have to relate to get that child to, to raise them the way you want to raise them, or to get them to understand what you're trying to tell them, or whatever. Oh, parenting is, yeah, it's difficult. And to think of
It's hard.
all the all the helps we have now in our society, from learning on the spiritual side as well as the psychological side, and the physical, mental health, and just body health wise, that can help us as parents. And so you go back to many generations, say like to our great grandparents, or even our grandparents, and it's like they didn't have that. They only had what was passed down from them, right? Well, I should say some of those
Absolutely.
on especially, I think, on um, older medical healing things, like I do medicinal plants and herbs, and I love to grow them. And so that knowledge was just passed down from person to person. And it used to be everybody used it, but then at some point, that break in society came, and it was around, I believe, from what an elderly nurse friend told me, because she was in school in the 40s, and they were still using marijuana in the hospitals then for pain. It was their go-to for pain for everybody, and everybody did it. And I meant, at that time, that was the treatment. And so many things changed around that time, I believe.
Yeah.
And then we're told lots of new knowledge, so you think, well, that's good, that's what you want to go to, whereas the old stuff really is what you should have clung to, in many
Well,
ways.
that's the thing. I think that, part of the healing journey is that people think, oh, well, that didn't work. Well, no, not everything didn't work. The same, and like looking at your parents, like they didn't do everything wrong. They had amazing skills. They had resiliency. They had things that they gave you that, needs to be carried over, because I think sometimes we focus so much on the lack, what was lacked. But what about the strengths that they brought? And I think a lot of times part of what you're saying gets lost because we feel, well, at the other end of the spectrum is where the solution is. So we need to leave everything behind. But it's like, no, it's like with everything in life, what worked? take that with you, build upon that skill set, and see what was on the other side that could be brought in. Because for me, it's not like, go swinging the pendulum from one extreme to the other. For me, it's like finding that sweet spot in the middle of like what worked, what needs to be brought in, constantly reevaluating what is and isn't working, and realizing that it's not going to be like a cookie cutter, right? It's going to be very individualized to the child that you're dealing with, or the relationship with the family member that you're dealing with.
Yeah. Um, I think part of generational healing, this is a little bit different avenue of it, but I mean, our healing journey continues, right? Every day, basically. Or my work with ancestors, I've received much healing, um, emotionally and things in learning to have a relationship with them yet, as spirit beings, and
Yeah.
talking. And one thing that's just been really wonderful to for me lately, because I started feng shui, learning. I'm going to be a consultant because I see it as our homes as an extension of our biofields, right, and how that helps us heal. And but through dreams and meditations and an oracle reading and things, it came to me that my grandfather's sister was very talented. She had just the right thing. She always knew the right colors and the right styles and the right sizes of whatever to put in, and and she's been helping me, helping me learn. It's been a
Yeah.
wonderful support and wisdom, to have that spirit contact with her. Um, af I don't know, it's just a wonderful thing. Our universe, our world is wonderful. It's just our perspective with which we see it, right? And and healing, continuing that healing. So let's talk more then about the healing process and what things that you use, and how you use them in healing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So for me, I didn't have access to my ancestors. Like it really was just my parents. My grandmother from my father's side died when I was like 13. At 13, I wasn't asking so deep questions of her, right? And with my mother's side, her parents were gone at a very, like, I was very young. So for me, I had to really like go into the spiritual end of this. First, I had to heal myself, and really the beginning of my journey was through Reiki. Reiki was the beginning of my journey. I had a healing crisis, which opened me up to my psychic gifts, and really that was an opportunity for me to heal a lot of my religious trauma and reconcile with the parts of me that I gave up in my survival journey. But once I entered the world of spirituality, that's when I started to kind of see the little breadcrumbs and find my way. The first thing was a lot of what you said. I started to do some shamanic journeys to meet these ancestors who were able to introduce me to some of my guardian angels, some of my spirit guides, and also help me understand soul contracts, because that was a very foreign thing to me. Because I was like, what do you mean a soul contract? Right. So some of for me was learning that, part of my belief is that everything before I came to this world was decided. So essentially, my parents partnered up with me
Mhm.
and said, all right, well, we're going to be your parents and we're going to help you in your soul lessons in this lifetime. And we're going to play these roles. And, I believe now that my mother loved me so much that she chose to be, quote unquote, the villain in my story in this lifetime so that I can come in here and do what my soul desired to do and learn. And my father played a specific role, and I think part of that has helped me in the forgiveness part, is saying, okay, well, at a soul level, I chose this. At a soul level, I chose my parents. At a soul level, I chose my family, and I chose the circumstances of my life because this is what I wanted to come and learn. Um, and then, for me, then I started going down the rabbit hole of like, well, what does my name mean? Like understanding like the actual birth name that I have, right? So when I looked up Jennifer, it was like Welsh and English, and it's for fair one. So for me, when I saw the word fair one, I to me saw light. Like I'm gonna be the light in my family, right? And then my middle name, Iliana, comes from the Greek word helios, which is ray of light, sun, again, light, right? So to me, it was like, wow, I'm really going to be this light in my family. Like, because there's so much darkness in my family, right? And then even like my last name has French roots, but really it means brown one. So to me, it was like, how do I ground that light on earth? Right?
Hmm.
Because to me, it was like, I'm here to balance the light and the shadow, but create
That's
this, but be able to ground it and integrate it.
that's beautiful.
So just understanding what my birth name is. So I always tell people like Google it. What does your name actually mean? And because I believe your name was picked before you even came on this earth
Mhm.
side. And
Yeah.
then life path number. Right? What is your life path? I'm a 33. I'm a master teacher. I'm here to take all my wisdom and share it with others. You can't get wisdom if you have an easy peasy life. I'm sorry. Like, I'm sure people can challenge me on that, and I'm open to the challenge, but wisdom comes through trial and errors and tribulations and, remembering lifetimes of lessons and really being able to be a great student. I think that's key, right? And I think life experience is the best teacher. Um,
Mhm.
so that was another avenue I went down, another rabbit hole that I went in was understanding my life path, and of course I can't not talk about astrology because that's my love, my passion, but understanding the natal chart, understanding some of the very what are considered signature planets in your chart and how they can indicate about your soul's deepest desires, which would be your Pluto placement, right? What you came here to liberate from, because a lot of liberation comes from oppression and trauma, right? Past life, current life, and that was my Uranus. And understanding where my soul came from, South Node, and where I'm evolving to, North Node, is huge. My Chiron placement, because Chiron is the deepest wound you're born with in this lifetime, and it's also the medicine for it. Was huge in my evolution because that was like, okay, a lot of this makes sense. And even like looking at it like what are considered like the paternal maternal signs in your chart. So Saturn tells you a lot about father. So understanding my Saturn was huge, and mine's retrograde. So to me, it's like, okay, it's a reclaiming of that part. And my moon, which is maternal, really gave me insight into how I experienced the maternal energy in my life. And I had to kind of sit with that and ask myself, does that resonate with me? And is that how I want to express my maternal energy as well? So I think that was also huge. Understanding your natal chart, because I think that to me, that's your blueprint. That's like your Earth School curriculum. That's what you came here to do. And I found a lot of healing in that as well.
Mhm. Mhm. Could you go more into that as using that for healing? Um,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I just feel like there's so much in what you'd said. It's hard to put my mind on one
Yeah.
thing, and there's just so much there that for healing or for for our life that shows that there's a um, many parts of it were planned out, or as a the main guide or the
Yeah.
main map, and we take detours, or the detours are probably planned in there too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because that's the thing too. Like, even with like a natal chart, even understanding a soul contract, even understanding all of that, I always say we have free will. So at any point in our journey, we can choose to either, end a contract, start a new one, amend it, right? And that's a big piece of like discernment coming in and really making sure, like, am I ending a soul contract because like I feel like I have achieved what I came here to achieve? Am I doing it because it is harmful and is no longer serving my highest good? Because you could have started off with this contract, and then you go on your journey. And like for me, like one of the things that I want, because at the beginning I was like, oh, I'm going to end it by not having children, which we all
Mhm.
know that's not the
Right.
solution, because if I don't do the work, guess what? My nieces, my nephews, they're, anyone that I come in contact with that meets the unhealed version of me, it's going to eventually be impacted by me. So the
Mhm.
solution is not having children, right? So I had to kind of like relook at that. But a big part of me understanding the need to self-sacrifice in a way, because not having children would have been a form of self-sacrifice, was a lot of my chart. Like I have a sun in Pisces, which Pisces is the sign of sacrifice in the sixth house, which is a sign of devotion, service. So to me, it was like, okay, well, of course, makes sense. My sense of purpose is to self-sacrifice my desire to have children, to be of service to the greater good. But that's one way to look at it. But then if you look at my other chart, other aspects of my chart, no, there's just this very deep wounding in Chiron. My Chiron is in the eighth house, which is the house of merger, the merging of energies, and in Gemini, which is the sign of intellect. So it's kind of like, okay, working with my Chiron medicine is like, is my mindset that needs to be adjusted? Am I able to see this from a different point of view? Because again, Chiron is the poison and the medicine, right? So my mind, my mental landscape is what gets me into trouble a lot of times. But it's also the key to my liberation, because I can think of a different way to do things, right?
Mhm.
And with it being in Scorpio's natural home, I have the gift of death and rebirth. I can let these old ideas die, and I am powerful enough to create new ones that can replace them, right? And when I look at my South Node, which is in Scorpio, I came into this lifetime being able to do Scorpio very well. Now, as you know, signs have their light and their shadow, right? Scorpio has the power for deep transformation. But at some point, you have to allow whatever you transform to take true form. Let it be, let it settle, let it come to life, let it become a resource. I think sometimes, and that speaks to my North Node, which is in Taurus. Taurus is about grounding, about letting things be. Taurus is not about making changes. Tauruses don't like change. They want things to be steady. They want things to grow and be resourceful. And, so to me, it's kind of like a big part of my growth in this lifetime is to stop with the constant cycles of transformation and allow that transformation to settle. What does it look like if I let it sit for a couple of years? Right? The moment that something doesn't go as planned doesn't mean throw out, what is it, the baby with the bathwater. No, it's like, okay, sit through the discomfort and just wait for it to reach its fullest potential. And if at that point, if it doesn't work, then okay, yeah, go and make the changes. But for me, I always went through these deep, deaths and rebirths. And it's like, no, this lifetime is not about that. It's not about the drama and the trauma and the complications. It's about ease and flow. And even that with my chart ruler is Venus. Venus rules Taurus. And Venus is not about complications. She wants things to be beautiful and graceful and harmonious, right? Which goes against everything that I feel was my inner landscape at birth. For me, things were always meant to be complicated. But do they have to be, right? Because it's
Right.
a choice. Life is all about choices, right? So by me understanding that in my birth chart was humongous. It's like, wow, it was like eye opening.
So, in your astrology work with people, then do you see in working then with generational healing? Do you ask for, say, like the birth dates or whatever of some of their parents or grandparents or children, right? So you can
Yeah. If they
see
have it, I
ties,
can't.
see ties
Absolutely.
between them.
I've had sessions where tremendous amount of healing has happened just by understanding. Like I'll have, children that want to understand their parents. And if they have their birth information, we could take a look at their chart, and depending on what the actual issue was. So let's say there was a big issue with communication, we will take a look at that Mercury, because Mercury is what rules communication, right? Where was it? What sign? What house? What aspects was it making to other planets? And then we can compare it to that child's chart and say, like, for example, if you had, let's say, a Capricorn, and I always go for Capricorn and Cancer because they're polarity points. But let's say you have a child who is a Cancer, in the way that they communicate and receive communication, they're very sensitive, right? And you have an authoritarian parent that doesn't have time for feelings. I just need you to get things done. I don't care how you feel, get it done. That's going to be so hard for that child. But understanding that your parent wasn't intentionally seeking to hurt you, that's just how they communicated. That is how they got things done. Is huge, because it's like all of a sudden you're like, wow, like it wasn't personal. It was who they were. And they didn't have the awareness that I now have, because I had this information in front of me. They didn't. It was never personal. It gives people the ability to detach and become more objective as they view the situation.
Kind of allows you to step back and say,
Absolutely.
and get a better perspective. I did gardening for, I have my college degrees in horticulture, and I was doing a number of years ago, I was doing gardening for an elderly people and to help them stay in their homes longer. And she taught me so much, this 90-year old lady. She was out there working with me, and she would teach me how to trim, and I thought I knew how to trim stuff like bushes or whatever. She said she would do something, and then she'd said, now you got to step back. And so we would step back 10, 20 feet and look at it and get all the perspective, and then you go in and look again. If you're too close all the
Yeah.
time, you don't see the big picture, and you can take it in a just miss and cut way too much, or not enough in, or whatever the situation may be, because you don't have that big picture. So sorry. Just
Yeah,
memories
and,
that come,
and
right?
it's huge.
Uh,
Sometimes, well, it's absolutely, yeah, and that's why I say sometimes it's like you got to get off the stage to see the dance floor. You can't be in the dance floor and see the choreography and see what other people are doing if you're in it. So I think that these are ways to allow yourself the time to detach. And then, like you said, like, getting a different point of view when you were trimming the trees. Like if you're on top of the tree, you're trimming. Well, of course, it looks beautiful until you look at it from a different angle. You're like, oh, I missed that whole section. You
yeah,
know?
right. That's right. So you've kind of hit on then how you use um, the astrology in generational healing. How do you use then, like, numerology, or the I'm
Yeah.
assuming that because you know all these, then whatever spirit leads you in as you're working, you pull that
Yes.
information, that way of working in to help integrate, right? And so I that's what I'd kind of like to do. Each of these different modalities, or how each of those play into generational healing. So do you want to start with
Absolutely. So
numerology
for the
then after
numerology,
astrology?
yeah, absolutely. So I always go to like life paths because understanding a person's life path number gives you an understanding of like where their framework is and where a lot of their um, thinking and actions and doings come from. Because this is the thing, we're all on a journey, and the way I look at like the life paths is they kind of build up. I had a teacher that once said your life path number is if you were a video game, that's the level you're born into. And I always like that analogy. So like if you're like, if you have like a child, let's say you have a child that's like me, a master teacher, born to parents that are like maybe a life path one, there's already going to be a discrepancy, right? You're already going to be parenting a child who is chronologically a lot older than you, or maybe viewing life at a greater perspective than you. And instead of trying to get that child to minimize, because it's the thing I noticed too with parents when they're kind of threatened by their children, is that whether they're conscious or not, they start to break them down a little bit to get them down to their level. And it's not like out of like being mean. I think it's just like, well, I can't get to you, so I'm going to try to get you down to me. But I think it's like, no, how about it's like we find a way to meet each other where we are? Like, let me tell you about me. You tell me about you. Let's get to know each other and let's get to see what is in common. Because all, even though these life path numbers are different, there's still that common sense of evolution and growth. And a three might do it differently, more by focusing on how they express themselves than a six who's focusing more on harmony and balance, right? But at the end of the day, we're all trying to grow and we're just going about it in different ways. But if we focus on what is similar between us, and then we can look at it from learning from each other instead of trying to convert each other, because that's another thing. This is what I believe, and I need you to believe this. No, how about you believe this? I believe that. How do this all work together? How can we actually be bigger and conquer more like land together by you focusing on what you're really good at and I focus on what I'm really good at and we come together and work. I think there's so much competition. And I'm not saying like, like a football game, but it's more of like, but my way. It has to be my way. And I think a lot of us are competing to be seen, to be heard, to be validated, to be acknowledged. But at some point, one of us has to say, okay, well, I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to acknowledge you. I'm going to see you. I'm going to meet that need that you have so that finally that part of you could be, quieted. So now you can see more. And I think that's a lot of maturity. It takes a lot of maturity and a lot of awareness to be able to do that when you also have a very similar need.
So, but how does, I mean, I agree, definitely. How does numerology, I mean, how does that, how do you use that to do what you were saying, to see which person, like you
Well,
add
it's
up
kind
all
of
the
similar to the,
numbers
it's
of
kind of,
their names
yeah.
and
So
then that
there's
go
different
by that
ways. So if
many?
you're,
Okay.
yeah, so if you're looking at like life, like their life path, it's just their birthday, right? If
Mhm,
you're looking to get to like their heart's desire or their personality, stuff like that, then you need the entire name, first,
mhm,
middle, last name, and then there's a formula. And then you either add up all the letters or you only do the vowels and you get like different
mhm,
numbers. And then you and depending again on what the situation is, focus on a very specific number, and you can do like a whole console on that if you wanted. For me, I always use numerology with the astrology because a lot of it does translate over, and a lot of times you find that a lot of the stuff kind of just aligns, which goes back to my makes me truly believe in the whole we planned this before we incarnated, because there's just too many coincidences when you look at the person, what I look at when I'm looking at a person and there's intention in his lifetime. So yeah, I would work with the person if it's a couple or parent child. I will look at both of them and do a comparison of both of them and help them understand, you know, this is how this person is, this is how this person is. And of course, you are the living sample of it. I will never say that, if someone tells me that doesn't resonate, I'm not going to force it, right? I'm not going to make it fit because you are living this experience. But I could say to you, this is how this number typically expresses itself. And I'll
mhm.
go through it with the person and see what resonates and what doesn't. And then I'll say, this is how this number expresses. Now, how is that impacting your relationship? And sometimes people are like, I never realized that this is how this person sees things. Or because I think a lot of it is just miscommunication and misunderstandings.
Oh, yeah.
And people take it personal.
Yes, because of our old stories, you end up feeling that you're not enough.
Yeah.
And so then you get in that protective or more powerless thing, or you get into the roaring, anger thing. uh,
Yeah.
it's so easy that we develop those old patterns because they are generational patterns because they apply to
Yes.
almost everybody, right? And so they're in our DNA, they're in our life, they're in our biofield, right? And they're in
Yeah.
the examples that we learn, they're in our daily interactions, and they're I was going to use the word hard. I don't think that's quite the um, once you begin the inner healing, it's like it's more frustrating than hard, right? Because you want to change those, you want to shift the patterns so that you can begin
Yes, it is.
to
Yeah.
react differently to different things. And that's where all the different healing modalities can come into play, because each I mean, I notice it most, of course, in biofield tuning, because that's what I do. But I'm not a hypnotherapist, but I love to be a participant in hypnotherapy, and I do a lot of meditation, and each of those is so valuable. Tapping, I use that.
Oh, yeah.
But also, when I had my natal chart read for the first time, I was bawling, because it was like an explanation for all the things I couldn't explain, right? Of why I
And
did
you
what I
were
did.
seen.
Yeah.
Yeah. You were finally seen by someone else. And I know there's just something about a complete stranger validating your life experiences. For some reason, makes them feel more real, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Because this person
Well,
doesn't know you.
yeah. Yeah. Well, and maybe it's because our emotions are too tied up in the interactions with the say
Yes.
the parent, or whatever, or it's most of our parents aren't aware of that, right? Most of us have grown up. I mean, I think that's what's so awesome with the age we're in now, where so many people are waking up to inner healing and becoming more, exploring the deeper spiritual things. And it's like all the generations in the past, our parents didn't have it. It's not that they didn't want to relate to us in better ways, but it's because they didn't know. They didn't know it existed, right? It was just life. It was just survival. It was just
No.
what we've always done, and we're trying our best, right? I mean, for most parents, I know my parents always tried their best, and some, of course, have more problems and can't
Yeah.
do their best at different times, right? But it's so awesome that maybe this, just the life we're living, I mean, the where we're at now, with more people becoming more involved, it can help shift the generational things in an easier
Absolutely.
way, so it's not years and years of energy healing, or mental healing, or physical healing, that we can begin to shift these patterns and listen to your spirit and shift easy instead of shift hard. That's what I'm learning in my life, anyway, to
I
shift,
agree.
that I'm just finding that I'm shifting easy instead of shifting hard. And it's like a dream come true.
It is because I always say you're your ancestors' wildest dream come true, right?
Yes,
And
yes, yeah.
to me, it's like, so I always look at it as like generational healing. I always look at it, it started out as a curse, right? And then we're good to the healing, and eventually we get to the generation that thrives, but the generation that thrives continues to thrive because they continue to heal, right? So I think healing and
Yes.
thriving are very interconnected together. And I think it's a lot of like that healing with ease that you're kind of referring to, right? It doesn't have to be so hard. And I think that, recognizing that, because when I first started my journey, I was like overzealous. I'm like, I'm going to heal it all. And it's like, no, come on. You're like, got a very short lifespan on earth, and this later on and continue to work, maybe. But I think it's about recognizing that I'm going to take the strengths from the previous generation, do my part to strengthen the generation that comes after me, and give them a better set of tools in their toolkit to continue the work. Because the fact is, this is a lifelong work. Like, no one's coming to earth school because they just want to chill. We come here because we want to learn. We want to have this human experience that we can't have when we're a soul level. So of course you're going to come with challenges. But my goal is that the challenges of the next generation are a lot better than the ones that came before me.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's so important for us now, the ones of us making those shifts, and that to to be able to realize how generational they are, and that we can affect the future by healing ourselves, by healing the past, right? It shifts the whole lineage. So
Yes.
um how then do you use the elements? Do you use go with four elements, or are you a five element person?
I always say the fifth is spirit. So however spirit looks like for you, it could be very, because it's not a tangible element. So people can interpret that in many different ways. But I do work with the elements in terms of releasing. And also if I want to like call stuff into me. I was, when I work with people who want to like amend or release whole contracts, I always say, what element feels best to you. Obviously, like right now we are in Gemini season. So work with air because Gemini is an air sign. And then if we're working with nighttime in the moon, I will work whatever element the moon is in at that time. Full moons tend to be like what the traditional, most common people say is releasing. But I tend to say when you do new moon work, which is when you call in intentions, if you want intentions to come in, they need a place to land. And if there's something blocking those intentions from landing, that needs to be released. So I do a lot of releasing during the new moon um, as well. And depending on what sign she's in, that's the element I'll work with. But also, if I look at a person's chart, right? And they're lacking certain elements, I may say work with those elements to call things into you. And then if you have a very strong element in your chart, I may just say that's your element to release with. So it all depends on the person. I use my intuition a lot to guide people the best way to either work with the elements to call in, because you can call in stuff too. People focus on intentions, but you can call in intentions into your soul work too. And you can also release what no longer serves you. And that includes some of those contracts that you've made before you incarnated. Even some of the lineage ones, like vows of silence. Like there's generational vows that people have taken that you can release and say, no, in this lifetime, I won't be silenced. I will speak, right?
Hmm. Yeah. And I was just we have a few people watching, and I was just going to say, if any of you have a question for Jennifer regarding the generational healing and the modalities she used to do that, please write it in chat here, and um, I'll read it here for everyone. Here's one. I have a question. Are you calling specific entities or energies for assistance?
I work with angels. So when I'm working on healing, I will work with Archangel Raphael. When I'm looking to release or cut cords, I will work with Archangel Michael. And when I'm working with ancestors, I would ask Archangel Azrael to help my ancestors cross the veil to get closer to me. Those are the ones that I work with the most. I'm an angel girl, so I tend to be with them. But there's other, different deities, and you can work with if you chose to that can, get you similar results. I just tend to specialize in angels.
All right. Um, hmm. the We talked some more about the disrupting the old patterns again. Can Is there examples, um, uh, generic examples or whatever you could use, or not using names, to show how, say, you're using the elements, or um, your astrology was more specifically shifted patterns?
Oh yeah, so I can give you a real life example. Me, so for my family, women were stay at home. They didn't work. They didn't get college education. They raised children. My father was a very firm believer in that. Now, in my natal chart, my Saturn is retrograde, which means at the time of birth, it was from the sky, it appeared like it was going backwards. To me, that's always an invitation to reclaim, reimagine, redo something. In Scorpio, which is my father's sun sign. My father was a sun Scorpio, and my father was very, very controlling. So when I turned 16 years old, I said, I'm going to get a job. And my father was like, you are going to ruin this family because we were given government assistance. If you get a job, they're going to take our assistance away. You're selfish. How dare you? That is not for you to do. I do not permit you to do that. I'm like, I don't care. I'm going to do it anyway. I got a job. My father was angry, didn't speak to me for a while. He eventually got over it. But I did go to college. I got my master's degree. I am the breadwinner in my family. I broke a lot of those molds of what women in my family could or could not do. I am a mother, but I'm also, an entrepreneur. I still have my nursing career, and I tapped into the metaphysical stuff, which was taboo in my family because that was, devil's work. I was like, no, it's not the devil's work. I will prove to you that you can safely do this work. So I was really like a trailblazer in my family. And a lot of that, when I looked at my chart, I was like, wow, talk about reclaiming Saturn in your chart and reclaiming it for all the other women who were told, like my mother, for example, she asked my father when she got to the States, can I learn English? I want to take classes to learn English. And my father said to her, that is stuff women do before they're married.
Oh, yeah.
And she was denied the opportunity to learn the language. So when my father told me I couldn't do something, I did it out of spite.
Right.
And I
Sure.
think that fire is still lit within me. But I feel him on the other side rooting for me. And I've had journeys where my father has shown up as his younger self. One time he showed up, I didn't recognize him. I'm like, who are you? He goes, I'm your dad. I'm like, he goes, because of you, we get to still heal on this side. And I've
Oh,
never been so
absolutely.
proud of
I
that.
find that all the time. The ancestors
Yes.
heal as we heal
I'm like, who
ourselves,
are you?
as we feel do
Yes.
the ancestral healing. Yes, they, and some of the ancestors, yes, sometimes, I mean, I know who they are. It's like you can feel their vibes, right? And and
Yes.
their intention. You feel that, and I know which ones they are. But if I see them in my mind, I don't always see them in my mind, but sometimes I do, and it's like they're um, they're not the age I knew them, right? They're much younger, or sometimes
Yeah. No.
babies are older children. As you know, they've been
Yes.
in the growing process. That's what I see in the afterlife. If you don't get where you need to go now, you go to the afterlife and you continue your journey there until you're ready to move forward. And it's like you can see that the ancestors grow younger, right, as they heal. The babies grow older
Older. Yep.
because they're growing up, and in status, mental status or spiritual status, right? And yeah, it's just really cool. The So I have some questions here from
Yeah. Sure.
that are in the chat. One was, then, have you encountered extraterrestrial, interdimensional influence as you work?
So not an
For
extra.
me, just entities or angels is, but not what I would say
Yeah.
from an outer realm of some kind. But what about you, Jennifer?
So for me, I am a star seed. So sometimes I will connect to my star seed lineage, the Pleiadians. That's where my lineage originated from, the star seed family. And one of my last journeys, I was brought there and I saw myself in water with my sisters. And I remember staring up at the sky, seeing the stars. And one of my sisters said to me, she's like, you just love that place. You always go back. And I was staring at Earth. And I believe that was before I incarnated in this lifetime.
Hmm.
So that's my
Interesting.
closest encounter to.
Yeah, interesting. So there's one more,
And
another question. I'm sorry. There's a glitch, a timing glitch in
it's
the
okay.
thing. So, do you always tap into the past, or maybe into some future incarnations, also?
So the most futuristic I've ever had was I saw my children as adults. they came to me in a journey. And because I remember at that time I was having a lot of self-doubts about whether I understood the assignment to bring them to the earth side. And I saw them as adults. And I remember my son looked at me and said, Mom, just remember the only thing we're going to remember is how you made us feel. So I got to see them as adults. So that to me was a future vision of them.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. Yeah. So, I'm just gonna, we have other questions here. Someone was wanting to know how to get hold of you, Jennifer, and I do have links below. I have your social
Yes.
media links and I have your website link below. But if you would like to verbally speak to that, they're saying, great podcast. Where can I get information to connect with you? That they were interested in astrology reading. Is there a discount because of listening through the podcast? And
Yeah. So yeah, definitely. So I would say info at jenniferilianacoaching.com is my email. If you reach out and say, hey, I listened to the podcast for Carla, I would definitely do a discounted reading for you. And that's the best place. I mean, I would say go to the website because it goes into details of what I do, but I love interaction. So just reach out to me personally and I would love to just talk to you and give you a very detailed explanation of how I could serve you. Because again, the website is very generic, but once I get to talk to the person, I intuitively get downloads on how I can be of service. And if I can't, I have an amazing referral program. I can refer you to the best practitioners in the area to help you as well.
very cool. All right. Um, and someone had commented about the relating to the black sheep stigma. And I think a lot of us get that in many ways. The ones of us doing the inner healing, where you're, makes a separation, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it heals and or shifts in a okay way, and sometimes it becomes difficult for a while, right? And
Oh, yeah.
sometimes it stays difficult, stays more estranged. I know it's like the saying, you pick your friends but you can't pick your family type of thing. I mean, family is always family,
Absolutely.
but it doesn't mean you relate to them anymore or they relate to you necessarily. You'd think you would, but I know from the last 20 years of my life, nope, it doesn't work that way.
No.
as
And I
as
think
I
it's
change, you step away from the old and make your shifts that you need to make so that you can be whole or feel whole, right? We are whole. It's a matter of feeling whole and knowing that we're whole. Um, here's
absolutely.
um, there's would you recommend any books connected to your work?
So I would say one of the books that I has opened me up a lot to the type of work that I do. I had to put it in the links, but it was from Miss Dr. Athena Parakis. She wrote a book on rituals, and I can actually give it to Carla, and she could put it on the link. That was a great book. Non spiritual, the holistic psychologist. She's written a lot of books about. She's going on her fourth book that I've all read, and they have been amazing in me understanding the psychological. And she's also spiritual, so because she does a holistic approach to healing, she does touch upon spirituality here and there. She's amazing, and she has a self healer circle that I'm a member of. So I learned through her. So I would definitely look at her and her work. I highly recommend her. And yeah, those are the biggest ones. I would say start there with the psychological healing and with the books and rituals from Dr. Athena Parakis. She's written a couple of other books on chakras and crystal healing that I would highly recommend, but that's a good starting point.
All right, beautiful. And so, is there anything you'd thought that, or encouragement you'd like to leave people with before we close, Jennifer?
So I just want to say to all the generational healers, I see you. I love you. Thank you for choosing to do the work. I know the work is hard, but it's so needed, and you're never alone. I know sometimes this healing work can feel very isolating and like you're the only person in the world doing it, but we need to find each other, unite, and continue to support each other like we would have back in the days when we had villages. people didn't do the work alone. And there's no reason why we shouldn't in this day and age when we have so many resources available to us. So feel free to reach out to me if you want a partner to do this work with.
All right. And that just reminded me, you might not be familiar, but I know a lot of my usual listeners and things are familiar with. There was a gathering called a confluence in Texas a few weeks ago in May. A lot of like-minded people came for a lot of it's about inner healing or energy healing things. And so I would encourage you in that connection, right, that Jennifer was talking about. Start a confluence in your area. A friend of mine is starting one in our area, in my area, her area, that we're both in the same. And if everyone could do that in every state, or break your state down into different things so that that local connection can occur, that would be a great way to do it.
Yes.
So, all right,
Connection
and
is key.
yes, yeah. And so many thank yous in the chat there, Jennifer.
Oh,
Thank you
thank
for
you.
your work. And so thank you all for watching. We appreciate you being here and appreciate your interaction. And Jennifer, thank you for your work too, for all
Thank
the learning that
you.
you do and then tying those together. I know that's what I find, that the more I learn, the more spirit pulls in different things to use
Yeah,
in a beautiful way. Yes.
I
So,
agree.
okay. All right. We'll talk to you all later. Thank you all for watching,
Thank
and
you.
we'll talk to you later. I'm just going to put this on here before it's too late here. Please like and subscribe if you haven't, so that the channel can grow and more people can see us. So, again, thank you all. Bye bye.